All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 40 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. We were trying to get on Facebook Live and having major issues, so we are recording this now and then uploading it. I am here with Chelsea Adair. That's how you say your last name, yeah? Or
Yeah, it is.
great. And just briefly, for those of you who are tuning into this show for the first time, this is a show that I created to interview different thought leaders, coaches, therapists, all in the realm of transformation. And what I'm interested in is transformation for the sake of having more of yourself, more intimacy with life, as opposed to gaining mastery over something or getting something that you want in life. It might be a natural byproduct that by, cultivating this inner transformation, we actually do, well, that's actually what we'll be talking about today. We do actually create a sense of fulfillment, and then sometimes those things get created in our lives, or the things that we're wanting do get created in our lives. But yeah, so we're going to be talking today about the topic of today's episode is what creates true fulfillment in relationship. And we're going to be talking about relationships of all kinds, including your relationship with yourself. So I'm really happy to have Chelsea here, and I'd love to introduce you before we get started. So Chelsea is a women's coach, yoga teacher, and emotions and embodiment guide. And this is also going to be uploaded onto Instagram, and that is actually where I first was introduced to Chelsea and her work. And she's got, I think you're more active on Instagram, right, than Facebook?
Yeah, than Facebook, yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because one of the reasons I was drawn to Chelsea is because, there was a couple of reasons. One is I just really felt your authenticity come through in your posts. And, both in terms of who you are as a person and who you are as a leader and a coach and a guide. And also just, there was a certain kind of authenticity in your, I don't want to say, like, even in the depth of the work that you offer. Like, I could feel that what you were offering to women and what you were writing about was like a deeper inner journey where you were really helping women to, and even what you were writing about and offering, in your writing was helping your audience to really connect deeply with self and to develop the tools to do that. And then I got to meet you, and we had a conversation before this interview, and really could then even got to feel more of that authenticity coming through, and then learned a little bit more about your journey even in the coaching world, and sort of that you've carved your own way by really following your own truth, which I think is just also a beautiful modeling for women and the women that you serve. So and then the other thing that one of the reasons that I was kind of drawn to your work is because you were talking about a system that we'll talk a little bit about today, AEDP, which stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, that I had studied intensively like a while back and used in my work somewhat. And I was excited to see that kind of in the coaching world, because when I studied it, and even in the intensive that I was in, it was pretty much all therapists. So it's great, and I know that maybe a colleague of yours or someone just wrote a book on how to make use of AEDP kind of you can talk about this more as we get started.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that system is a system, Chelsea can get more into it, but it's a system that is really, I think, going moment to moment into one's somatic experience and also working with our attachment system in a way that really allows for a deep meeting of self and also of healing of our early attachment, which we'll also get into today. So I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that really beautiful introduction. It it's my mission to be as authentic. Just, it's my mission to be myself, you
Yeah.
know? And so it's just kind of nice to receive that affirmation and that validation that, okay, you are, it's being seen. So thank you for that intro. And yeah, I'm really excited and honored to be here tonight.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I love that you just said also that, you're like, it's my mission to be myself. Right. And also
Yeah.
that's what you want to transmit to others. Like you just get to be
Mm-hmm.
you. And actually there's a certain, I mean, we're going to be talking about what brings fulfillment in relationships, but I really believe that
Mm-hmm.
what brings fulfillment is that we get to be ourselves. We're more and more
Yeah,
full of who we are. We are allowed
absolutely.
to have the feelings that we have, to have the needs that have, even if they're not always met. It's like the fact that we're in contact with, our inner experience
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's what I'm all about is self-love on the inner journey. And I actually just wrote a post about that like before we hopped on the call because I had an experience with it of exactly what you said, just honoring your own needs, even if they're not being met, or your own emotions, as big as they might be. And I had a trigger come up in two different situations where I was feeling jealous. And it was a jealousy wound that stemmed from, and I was only able to identify this and really sit with it because I have taken so much time to dive deep into like my attachment style and understanding my core emotions and really being a safe container for me to explore and express and process. But I had a couple of instances where this like jealousy wound came up that is really just stemmed from abandonment and that feeling of not being chosen as a child, when parents get divorced and then they get remarried. And so that wound came up like big time over the last few weeks. And I actually, only because I was able to accept the fact that I needed to voice that, like I needed to voice that I didn't feel chosen, even though I knew it wasn't true. And I needed to like honor that there was pain in that for me. And I did. I literally was with two of my girlfriends who were just getting to know each other deeper. I was already really great friends with them. And then I just felt completely left out at a certain point in the conversation. And they wanted to go do something afterwards. And I was like, I don't feel right now. Like I have to share this. And it was just, I broke down and cried, but I was just like, I feel so left out. I don't feel chosen. And it was wonderful to be able to have such safe relationships where I could say that and I could share it and it could be received. And also it was an opportunity to heal that old childhood wound. But it was only because I was able to see, like, I have a deep need of feeling chosen, and that's okay. I still choose myself daily, and it's almost like an act of choosing myself to just say what's on my heart. But it was just a lovely, like, it was painful, and it's, like, it just, but there was no shame around it anymore. There's no shame around that desire to feel chosen and desire to feel like a part of. So yeah, the journey of the self, getting to the self, is really like my all-time passion. I feel like it's what I'm here on this earth to do. So
I love that you started with that example. Thank you for sharing just, this personal example from your life. One of the things that I really love about it is I think you said it really well. It's like you have an understanding of yourself and you have a comfort with your own emotional experience that you've developed, that allowed you to both know what you needed in order to, feel connected to your friends again, but also that what I really hear in that story is that you're like, it's like you have yourself, you are able to hold yourself, and you're able to bring it into relationship. And you're not then you didn't come in then projecting onto them or thinking that they needed to do something different, or, right? Like, I mean, maybe you might have a need of them. Like you could have had a deeper need, like, hey, I would like you to, show up for me in this way, or I would feel included if you did A, B, and C. Are you available for that? But still, those questions, and that would even, to me, your story, it's like, because you have yourself, because you're in deep relationship with yourself, the questions would come from that place, right?
right, yeah.
yeah, it wouldn't come from like, I need you to meet this or else, or a sense of lack inside of yourself. So there's just something really beautiful about your story as we begin this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. What a way to intro me. So, hey guys.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's
Yeah.
great. Well,
Yeah.
there's so much in there. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, and so I'm just kind of feeling into, I mean, even with that story, so maybe the best place to start would be if you just want to give, and Chelsea has a podcast that's the Self-Love Sisterhood. Is that what it is? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So maybe we could even, self-love is kind of a word that's thrown around. And so maybe
Mm-hmm.
you could just define what you mean by self-love. Mm-hmm.
Mm. I love this question. So thank you for asking it, because I ask this question to every single guest on my podcast, and it's always so fascinating to hear the different responses. And I feel like my response changes sometimes, but it always comes down to the same thing. For me, self-love is exactly what I was describing in that example, the previous example of my friends, of just having such a deep understanding of myself and my core needs and my core emotions, and being able to accept and love all parts of me just as I am. And that only comes from like unraveling my stories and going back into not shaming myself for wanting to be chosen, not shaming myself for wanting to be in relationship, or not shaming myself for wanting to be successful, like things, little things like that. And repairing my relationship to those desires is an act of self-love for me, and really just showing up for myself and doing what I want in my deep in my heart and soul has been an act of self-love. So just the work that I do in general right now, which is support other women in coming back into themselves through all kinds of different avenues, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but like attachment and identifying core needs and core emotions, and working through that, and trauma, and there's just so many avenues to get to know yourself. And so for me, at the really at the base of it all, self-love to me is just owning all parts of who I am, shadow and light, and loving all of it equally. And knowing that it's a dance, it's a constant dance of shadow and light. And I really can honor my days when I'm feeling like I just want to cry, or I can honor the days where I'm feeling in pain or angry. And that for me has been the most beautiful and pure and authentic example of self-love that I've experienced for myself. And so, yeah, so long answer to that question. The short answer is just, just embracing shadow and light, and allowing myself to dance with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece that I really love about what you're sharing is, and I want to just stress, and I think, is it's being in relationship to yourself in each moment, right? Like self-love isn't really, it's a concept that's thrown around, but it's not like I've arrived at self-love, right? It's
right.
not,
Yes.
It's an ongoing process of being with self and meeting the moment of, and that's what I hear you saying, meeting the moment of what's arising, whether it's, your deepest pain or your deepest, or your, most, whatever, blissful high.
Yeah.
And, you said, I think it's really important and we can get into this with AEDP. It would be a good thing to get into, like shame, right? But that, yes, self-love is obviously the more we can let go of shame, we can be more in love, but also that we can embrace shame as well. That shame is part of, it's something that can arise, as we're being with ourselves. And so I also hear it as like self-love it's the relationship that we have with self. And then that really determines also how we relate to others and how we relate to our world around us.
Yeah, that's been like what I'm so fascinated by right now is, and I think I've always been fascinated by this whole idea of the deeper the relationship you have with yourself, the deeper connections you'll have outside of yourself, and with family, with friends, with coworkers, colleagues, neighbors. Like the simplest of connections and relationships suddenly becomes so much more meaningful when my relationship with myself is there. And like, I love what you just said of it being like a moment to moment experience. And that's actually not something that I identified until this year, that, you know, quality time is my love language above anything else. Is just quality time. If someone is present with me and I know that they're there in that moment and they can see me, and you know, there's that attunement and that like reciprocity, it's just, that's what really matters for me. And I realized, like, oh, if quality time is my love language, like how can I really give that to myself? And exactly what you said of just being present to myself and my feelings and the shame as it arises, and the guilt and the anxiety and the blissful joy, and, you know, just being with it moment to moment allows me to be in relationship with other people in a greater capacity and in the most authentic way. Because I don't feel like I'm fighting anything inside of myself or hiding anything, or yeah, it's just, it's a different experience to have bonds outside of yourself when you have such a strong one within.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's so much in what you said, and well, so I think this is a good place to unpack. So how do I how do I phrase this question? So what is the journey to get there? I think that's what we really, actually, that's the core of sort of what we're diving into today.
Right.
Because that what you're describing is, I think, a capacity that someone would have if they had had healthy, secure attachment when they were in their early childhood relationship. So part of, right, and this is what we're going to dive into, part of how we, this is what we do in both of our work, right? Part of how we develop this self-love is actually in our early attachment with our caregivers. So
right.
Need other people so that's how we internalize this sense of value and safety and worth, and, you know, sort of seeing ourselves clearly through the attunement and mirroring of the other. And so if that, you know, I think this is the conversation to dive into. So what you're describing is this beautiful relationship with self, that then you have yourself, and then you can enter into all kinds of relationships and feel even more deeply fulfilled. And so why don't you start, maybe you can talk about some of the ways that you help women to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for I tend to do that, like just get straight to like the beauty of everything. And I'm like, oh wait, okay, let me go back. Let me show you how to get there.
Actually, I mean, it's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect for
yeah.
the conversation, I think. Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. The first thing I do is return back to that attachment style and start to unpack, like, what was the birth story? What was your relationship like with your mother and father, like in your first year? What was their relationship like with one another? You know, were they arguing? Were they loving towards one another? Because that is then translated to the child. And you know, Dr. Peter Levine, the creator of the Somatic Experiencing Institute, once said on a podcast that attachment wounds actually begin in utero. So his theory is that, like, you know, in utero, this attachment style begins because this, you know, as a child, this energy inside of the womb is picking up and attuning to, just naturally, or not subconsciously or consciously, or just this like floating cell inside of a body growing, but there's already this kind of energetic awareness of what's happening around you. And so his theory is that your attachment style doesn't just begin the moment that you are birthed and held, and it's like that skin to skin contact. It's also affected by the relationship that your mother had with herself during pregnancy, the support that she had from other people, because you're already attuning. And in that sense, you know, when you're in the womb, there's already that, in one way or another, there's a co-regulation happening. You know, she's eating healthy to feed you as a baby, and, you know, so it's really just visiting the attachment wounds, going all the way back, because I think people, in my experience, the women that I work with, so actually I'm I'm 28 years old, and I really don't believe in like age being anything, but the majority of the women that I serve are over the age of 30, and over 75% of them have kids. So, you know, they've already had life experience, they've had relationships, some have been divorced, and some are still dating. And I do have, you know, women that are clients that are around my age, and in my experience, they have an awareness of their attachment style now in adulthood and what's happened in their past relationships from like their teenage years. They might go back to teenage years. I just very rarely see that, but they'll see, oh, I was in an anxious avoidant dynamic. You know, I'm anxiously attached, I'm avoidantly attached, and there's almost just like this label of attachment, but there's so much more to unpack with attachment wounding that can really support one's growth. And as you said, like connection to self. And so what's really been the key to opening up this pathway of building that strong container of self is unpacking the attachment wound, unpacking the attachment style, going all the way back and getting super curious to going back all the way to childhood, and going into it with that sense of curiosity of like, I just, you know, asking your parents about your birth story, asking your parents about what the dynamic was like in a household when you were like ages 0 to 3, you know, when you didn't have awareness yet. It's great to hear that because it gives you a sense of it's just a sense of empowerment of, oh, okay, this isn't, you know, I just love there's a butterfly in the background. Yeah, but just, you know, going back and hearing the story will support someone in seeing like, okay, I have a sense of agency now. I didn't when I was a child. I didn't have any, you know, ability to say, okay, I don't want to have this kind of attachment style in my life, so I'm going to walk out the door. That's just not possible. We rely on our caretakers. But now as an adult, if you can identify what was happening to you as a child, what kind of attachment style was being shown, and there could be like an emotional enmeshment. Like if you had a single mother and you guys slept in the same bed, and you know there's like an emotional enmeshment there, and really understanding that and what was happening there, and you know, tracing it and seeing how it's shown up in your adulthood, like in your adult life, and then learning how to reparent, you know, like really learning how to reparent yourself and heal that attachment style, like teaching yourself that is not, and you don't necessarily need to behave in that way to build relationship with somebody else. You know, you can trust that other people are safe, but it takes time. And you know, in working with women, identifying attachment wounds is number one. That always comes first because it gives you a sense of empowerment. But after that, there has to be a lot of nervous system awareness and what I call like the energetics of boundaries, which is a lot of it is just understanding the boundary of my skin. Who am I, right? And like how I feel somatically. Getting to know that is usually the next step that I take women through in order to build that deeper relationship with self. Because you mentioned this, like you have to have that sense of safety in your own container in order to do that work. And then I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but we start out by co-regulating. We learn how to self-regulate by co-regulating. And like you said, it's like what's mirrored by our caretakers, or, you know, like how we saw them take care of themselves and how they treated us is how we then choose to build relationships. And so you're almost having to go in reverse now and learn how to self-regulate in order to co-regulate. And it's just, you know, it's just this like dance of understanding, how do I feel and how can I stay connected to what's happening inside of me, inside my nervous system, like viscerally, what am I feeling? And rather than trying to attune to another person and perhaps like projecting, you know, and sensing that there is danger, right? Rather than safety and facial expressions and things like that. Just being able to identify with self and be in one's own body is really supportive in beginning to get a toe in and really trusting other people and letting them see you and letting them in.
It's really interesting, the last part of what you said, because it makes me think of like, we have to be the parent and the child at the same time, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to, like, what we didn't get in childhood, we then have to cultivate as adults. And so then, right, that's where you're saying like in childhood, you get that the co-regulation leads to, well, I mean, I would actually say that infants also self-regulate. It's actually a combination of regulation and self-regulation, but an infant that was only left to self-regulate would not grow in the healthiest way. So I think it's kind of both. It's about the parent kind of sort of modulating what the needs are of the infant and the growing child. But it is really interesting to think about how we do as adults when we don't get and so many of us have had to go on this journey, right? Like we have to then cultivate those, like we are kind of the parent and the child at the same time, or we are we're learning, we have to responsibly then go co-regulate even, like, capacity to then say, hey, to another person that's safe, hey, I need you, and using your words, kind of like a child will learn, but and to be able to take a no. So then it's like you're having to self-regulate again. Oh, this person might not be available. What are my other resources? Who can I now move towards? But what's interesting in what you shared as well, and it's just like popping a lot of different thoughts for me, is that, and this is something that I said in the write-up, I really do believe, and I think you do this work as well, and maybe we can get a little bit into how you use AEDP or some of the other nervous system stuff in your work, but that I also believe that, yes, we can teach people, like I also teach people a lot of different skills and tool sets to regulate their nervous system, and sort of all this stuff about attachment and like how to be your own inner parent, how to regulate, how to communicate, all of these things. I also think it's so crucial that we have these healing relationships with someone like yourself or someone like me, because I also believe that part of the internalization of that, part of how we learn that, still has to be in relationship with others, because we can't really do it in a vacuum. So it's not even just about learning a tool, which is also what parents teach their kids. It's also about like, oh, we're doing this work together, and wow, you can't, like an example that I always, comes up often is like, somebody feels really alone, but they actually can't take in my presence when I'm with them. So then how do we slow it down? And like, so it's inside of them that they need to learn that skill, but they actually need another person who can guide them and say, okay, I would guide them in a variety of ways. I mean, one may be to be like, okay, so you can't feel me, like, can you even take me in a little bit? Can you even like, can you feel me at all? And start to kind of widen that capacity, or to just be present with them in the fact that they feel really alone, and actually I am here, and it's okay for you to feel this, and exploring it that way. So anyway, it just, there's a lot here, but I think it seems like it's a both and. It's like we are having to kind of develop those I just think it's crucial that, and this is where I think some of the coaching industry doesn't serve people, is because it's not only about teaching people tools, like it's actually in the fabric of the relationship, that you create a lot of shifts for people. So I know that you do that in your work, so I'd love to hear how you do it, and also kind of how you might be using AEDP, which I think uses, I think also really uses that relationship between, client and whatever coach or practitioner.
Yeah, that's a great segue into it. And I was actually, as you were asking the question, instantly, AEDP, that's kind of where it comes in for me. And it's interesting that you mention it as the coaching industry, because I do have this grander vision of like, exactly to the point of what you said. You can give people tools, but to facilitate change requires relationship. There has to be this like reciprocity and like trust built, and like there has to be exactly what I think what you said was so perfect. I hear you. You can't feel me, and just being with that in that moment and validating somebody's experience rather than saying like, let's fix it. How can you start to feel me? Yeah. my experience of a lot of the coaching industry can be, here are some tools, like use them. And I'm going to keep you accountable to use the tools. And if it's not a safe relationship, a safe dynamic, safe group, safe one-on-one connection, the client might feel a sense of shame of not being able to feel like they've made a transformation yet, even with all of these tools. But sometimes what's actually missing is the true support and guidance that they need, that goes beyond just words and direction, and comes in the form of this it's new for them a lot of the times. Having somebody who can see them and see a greater vision for them while they're learning how to see that for themselves, and really hold them there, is what most people are seeking when they are finding a new therapist or finding a new coach, whatever that is. They want someone who can see them as they are and see a greater vision, because they don't want somebody to deny their current reality. And just say, go do all this stuff and here's how you make your life better. Mm-hmm. We want someone who can see us as we are now and validate our experience without giving it all the power. So, you have the validation of the experience, which then makes the person feel seen, and then they can trust you and they feel safe in your presence, because they sense, oh, she understands me. She sees where I'm at. Mm-hmm. And she's not just trying to fix me and, get me to the next level. And there is like that in it of itself has been a big driving force for me in continuing to cultivate that container for my clients, and also continue sharing this message for other coaches, because I think, you go into this work, for most of us, because you have a heart for humanity, and you want to make the world a better place, and that your role in doing that is showing up in service for others, and it's really just heart-centered work. That's all it is. And so a lot of coaches go into it for that reason, and therapists are well trained, right? So like they're true practitioners, so they understand how to build that relationship. Unfortunately, I think coaching has kind of taken this realm of just like anyone can be a coach, and we're finding out that's not true. It's not sustainable if that's, your belief. And so what I would love to see in the industry is, coaches learning practices like AEDP, which is all based upon building a safe relationship and creating this sense of earned secure attachment, right? Of like, you can identify, your insecure attachment styles and understand where they came from, and also understand that this new dynamic, this new client or patient therapist interaction is a safe place to heal the wound and enter into secure attachment. And it's a safe place to explore the emotions that are being felt. And I think what drew me into it, because there's another form of experience or accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy called ISTDP, which is, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's quite more intensive. Oh, I don't want to butcher it. So ISTDP is more focused upon kind of like pulling apart the pain. And there's a lot of emphasis on that in order to get the person to go back into the experience and within a safe relationship. But what I enjoy about AEDP is that there's an emphasis on staying with the good emotions, because oftentimes that also wasn't safe. And so, staying with the emotions that feel good, which oftentimes will feel foreign in the body, depending on your attachment style with your caretakers, or just family in general. If you were shamed for being joyful, that was me. Like, I was like the kid who was just so happy about everything, and eye rolls from cousins, friends. No, there's no harm meant, but it made me feeling my extent of joy in my body. It turned into a shameful experience. And actually, I see that that's the case for a lot of people. Like, excitement is hard to hold in the body. It's easier to stay with the sadness, even though conceptually you wouldn't think that, but it can be easier for a lot of people to stay with that than it is to stay with the good feeling emotions. but they need to feel like they're with someone that they can trust and are with someone who really can validate their experience and hold them in that container in a safe way in order to facilitate a change in the way that that person feels with their own emotions and the way that that person feels in expressing those emotions in the presence of others. And one more thing I wanted to add to, oh, sorry to interrupt. One more thing I wanted to add to that is just the idea of, just because you brought up the whole coaching industry thing, that really has sparked a lot in me. The idea of coaches understanding the importance of not just giving tools, but how to support somebody in implementing those tools. And you can only do that by understanding the person at a deeper level than just like what they want to do, what they want to change, and where they're at in their life. Just getting to know, you know, their childhood upbringing, the way that they interact in relationship is a great indicator of that. Like, you know, whatever they're reacting to can show us like what the unmet needs are, so we can start to work from there.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, this is why I think that there's a need, in order to be able to really deeply assess somebody in that way and provide them with that, you actually have to have some level of training in some of the things that we're talking about. And I have a particular vested interest in also the coaching industry and kind of like sort of the trauma that I think is caused here. I'm about to do a series of talks on it, and I did an interview with someone that was called one of my previous interviews was is the coaching industry giving you PTSD, and it was sort of looking at some of these dynamics. So, I mean, yeah, and I think exactly what you're saying, that you can't, the real and lasting change needs to happen from kind of understanding and being able to assess the person as a whole person, and also what they need in terms of their healing of early attachment. I mean, often, I mean, there are certain, I think you can also, I think coaches can offer, I mean, I won't get too down this rabbit hole, but I think coaches can offer programs that are not that, but I think that it needs to be very clearly stated, this is what we're doing here, this is what you're going to get out of it, and realistic to, you know, this is what, you know, I don't know what an example would be, but like, I don't know, could be like, you're going to gain mastery over this thing, and I can't think of an example.
No. Like almost just teaching like business coaching. Like here's how you send out an email thread, like an intro email thread. Like that's one thing, or, you know, but, or just keeping
or like I'm doing self-love, you know, somebody could say I'm doing self-love coaching, but just be very clear about like, we're going to be working with how you can, you know, take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis, not with the deeper stuff. I mean, people don't say that, but the point is I think that there's an importance of that, because and importance of, I think you and I are both sharing this desire for people to really be able to heal and grow and evolve, and that we both see that as being, obviously we share a love of this kind of work and seeing the change that can happen. I am kind of curious if you could speak, I would love for you to speak a little bit, if you can describe AEDP, since we keep bringing it in, and kind of what, you know, even the theory that they have of core emotions and sort of, you know, and even what I said, we both have used this as an example, but I think the way that we both work is, it's not only, it's like there's an assessment, but there's also, for somebody to feel truly seen and validated, the work is slow and intricate. That's my experience of it.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, go try this. I mean, there are obviously, I'm sure that, I mean, we're always giving our clients things also to, you know, work with in their lives. And I always say to people, like, you know, like I call it like nervous system hacks. It's like little things that like healing happens in the present moment, and so does like any big change, right? It's all just moment to moment stuff, but then we're kind of rewiring our nervous system and whatnot. But I think that there is something about, like, that's what I like about AADP is it's like you're tracking the relationship and like how regulated somebody is, and, you know, what their internal experience is like, sort of in the body and in their emotional world. And so I would just love for you to maybe talk about that a little bit, and also the theory behind it, so that if people are interested, you know, this is probably the first time, one of the first times that many people are hearing of this system, that people can kind of, you know, reference it more and learn more about it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a wonderful, it's been a wonderful tool for me personally, even just to use for myself. Cause like you said, it's all about, it's a long-term relationship, and you're really attuning to the other person within an AEDP model. So accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, as you said, really what it is about is identifying the clients and supporting them in identifying their core emotions in order to also identify their core needs, how to meet those, and cultivate this safe container and relationship between the patient and the therapist, or the client and the coach, or even parent and child. It actually can be, you know, transmitted into that kind of dynamic, and that's what I enjoy about it. But learning how to see this as a relationship that's being built and an experience that both people are having within. So the first part of it is identifying core emotions. And actually, who I really love following and learning from, who's an AEDP therapist, is Hillary Jacobs Hendel. She has a really reader-friendly book called It's Not Always Depression, and she created what's called the change triangle process. So first I'll just emphasize the emotions part of AEDP, because I think that's a pillar of it all, is identifying your core emotions. And what Hillary speaks about in the change triangle process is really rooting into 7 core emotions, which are sadness, anger, fear, joy, excitement, sexual excitement, and disgust. So she calls those the 7 primary, and actually that's from AEDP. So those are the 7 primary core emotions. And learning what that's like in the body can then support somebody in feeling safe with what's arising, because the model also expands into the fact that shame and guilt are actually inhibitory emotions, and we can know that from other sources as well. But shame and guilt are inhibitory emotions, and anxiety as well. It's kind of just like a jumbled up mess of a lot of emotions that we don't yet know how to identify. So shame actually might be something like disgust, sadness, and anger, and without that knowledge of the breakdown of emotions, shame just kind of keeps us from actually feeling it. And AEDP is experiential, so it's all about really feeling the emotion within the body. And you know, this is what I just love about it too. It's through the most basic and primal of things, like just breathing and being able to attune with somebody else and be present with them, and just being in the body and naming the emotion for the client when it's arising, for them to validate it. And like, oh, you know, like you're seeing anger is present, like supporting them and being with it, and allowing it to be present without it overtaking their body. It then gives them a sense of what might seem like it would be out of control in a setting that's, you know, not a safe relationship. And a big emotion like anger can be terrifying to somebody, because it feels like just this pent up rage, and you want to, you know, the natural instinct is like for fists to just close up. You want to yell, scream, punch, hit. There's, you know, and to have all of that emotion arising in a body, and in a body and in relationship with somebody, because most of us at a young age were taught that expressing anger in relationship with somebody else was not okay. It was just something that you had to like repress or save for later, right? Or somebody acts out in a burst of anger, and that then changes our relationship to what we think anger is. But in AEDP and in these kinds of models that are experiential, you're relearning what that emotion feels like in your body, what the experience is like for you, so that you can get familiar with that part of yourself, because it always exists. And to go back to what I said in the very beginning of like, self-love is understanding all assets, like all facets of yourself, all emotions, and knowing what they feel like, so that when they are present, you can give them the acknowledgement that they deserve. And because, I mean, everything is relationship, and AEDP is all about relationship, which I also love. There's this kind of relationship. There's a relationship as well when we're talking about core emotions to our inner child, and just identifying, you know, as acknowledging that inner child. I like to think about the emotions as a child. So if I'm feeling sadness in my body, or, you know, I want to acknowledge it, I want to look at it, I want to be present with it, I want to see it eye to eye and ask, you know, where is this coming from? How can I support you? Sometimes you just need to be present with it. There's nothing to do. And I equate it with a child. Like, if I see a child in the room and they're crying, I'm not going to like throw a blanket over it and say, save it for later. Right. Like, I don't want to do the same thing.
Or you're not going to explain it away. I often think about that, right? You're not going to be
right.
Like, oh, you're sad because of blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, you might, if it's, you know, in the fabric of what's up, but you might just be like, you're really sad right now. Like, this is feeling, and you don't need to actually know why.
Yeah, and that validation of emotion in a dynamic of somebody who's with an AEDP practitioner, or even just someone who's versed in it, or, you know, I mean, even this book that I'm describing, it's so reader friendly that I think everyone should read it, just so that you can understand how to identify core emotions and process them. But just even the idea of acknowledging the emotion and having the emotion be acknowledged within a setting that's in a person-to-person relationship. Like, hearing somebody say that my sadness is okay and I don't need to explain it away, that would just make me feel so much more supported. And just from that, I would feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I would add, thank you for that explanation. It's so beautiful. And I think it's, you know, this is an AEDP model, but it's also mirrored in a lot of other therapeutic techniques or theories, which is, you know, basically that shame and guilt and depression and anxiety tend to be screen emotions. Like, they're not, I mean, obviously we develop shame and guilt as children as a way to defend, actually all of those emotions, as a way to defend against the deeper emotions, because they were too scary to feel, or we weren't in a safe environment to feel them. But yeah, I think it's such a core important model, like for anyone. And what you said it great when you said, like, you know, to identify core emotions and be able to process them. Like, that is just at the heart of being human, right? Like, that's at the heart of our health, because we're always going to be feeling things. Like, we're always going to have different experiences. Some of them are going to trace back probably the bigger explosions of them trace back to our childhood and things that we weren't able to process, and now we need to in a new and safe relationship. And then I wanted to just add that I think AEDP, the focus, you know, for people who are just interested, they focus on attachment, because they actually teach different ways to be with different attachment styles. And obviously our attachment styles aren't like, we're not just, I agree with you that I don't think about it as like, you know, oh, I'm anxiously attached and therefore I have this, and this, but there, you know, we can be a combination. But I think that there's just, they teach, which I think is really beautiful. It's like, in the processing of these core emotions, in the presence with another, it's like how to work with different people based on these kind of early attachment wounds, right? Because somebody who is avoidant is going to be, they tend to be way or more avoidantly attached, like way more overwhelmed by too much information coming in. So they actually teach in AEDP kind of like with that style to like use very few words and to, you know, certain techniques, versus somebody who is more anxiously attached and really wants that connection and kind of like will feel more soothed by having more, you know, intimacy and more connection. But, you know, I think I just keep wanting to stress, and I love that we're having this conversation, but I want to stress is just the importance of doing this work with someone else. And I think because I think I'm getting it, at least from what you were sharing, and probably a little bit from what I'm sharing, but just that the intricacy of the work, that first of all, we we can't expect that our friends and our lovers and our partners and, you know, are going to be able to work with us in this such a deep core way. Like, it's a lot of pressure on a relationship. And so sure, we can, you know, we can bring, obviously, healthy relationships and securely attached relationships, we can bring the truth of our experience to other people, but we also want to be holding on to ourselves. And so this deeper work, in my opinion, is way better to do with someone who can facilitate it and that's their job. Like, they're there holding space for you. And then the other thing about AADP, which is so amazing, like coming from a therapy standpoint, is that, you know, it really acknowledges the relationship between, like, the real relationship between you as the practitioner and you and the client, which is different than some therapy models. And I know the coaching industry obviously has more of that relationship, you know, built into it, that kind of real relationship. But I think just, so it's not like, oh, I'm paying this person, so therefore they care about me. It's like, no, where's the real care? And you're really encouraged in an AADP model to find that place as the practitioner, the genuineness of that connection that you feel with your client, you know, that you are in a real relationship and you have real responses. And that's another thing that I think some of us missed, is that getting to feel the impact of our parents, you know, feel the sort of healthy impact, like, oh, who I am, what I said mattered to them, you know, or that I'm in pain mattered to my parent. Or even, like, in my case, some of my wounding was that I couldn't feel my parents. And so then there was a sense of, like, distance. And so even when I would work with, I've been in psychoanalytic treatments, and they would say things like, I've had a couple psychoanalyst people say to me, like, well, I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me if I share, like, you know, anything about myself. And I'm like, I can't feel you. And it was like, sort of, it was like, that actually would allow me to feel more connected if I could, like, feel, you know, what they, like, because and then that was part of the wound for me, was that I couldn't actually feel my parents, kind of what, you know, I couldn't feel the warmth and the love towards me, or I didn't know where they were coming from, you know. And it's like, somehow that was really soothing. That would have allowed me to feel more connected. So anyway, I just went on a little bit about that, but
no, I love that.
Yeah, and actually, I'm looking at the time. We probably want to. We'll probably do another one of these.
Yes,
but I'm just looking at the time, and I want to make sure that this is under an hour. So I don't know how long we've been on here. But yeah, I think I'm just stressing that. I mean, I think this is a beautiful model, and I'm also just stressing the importance of really what I think is important. I think we're both in agreement of really doing this moment to moment intricate work with somebody, and that the deepest healing, I think, and the way that we then learn to love ourselves and co-regulate is to, you know, is to basically create this new attachment relationship with a practitioner. That then, you know, then we are able, like you so beautifully demonstrated at the beginning, you know, the way that you were with your friends, that you trusted the relationship, you trusted yourself, like you knew that you could, you know, bid for that connection and that they would be there, but you also were doing it from a place of wholeness and from, you know, having yourself. So I just think it's beautiful that you brought in, you know, that example.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and just to kind of round off that whole idea of this work being done with somebody who's safe, so that other relationships in the community, in your neighborhood, in your family, all of those can thrive, because, as you said, you have an experience of what secure attachment is. And when you have that experience and you know it's there, it's almost like a home base. And so you know that no matter what, no matter where you travel or like how far you go from that home base, you can trust that it's always there. So just having that one place of secure attachment gives you the support and the encouragement and that stability to know that you can make decisions for yourself and have connections with other people and build relationships, and you're safe to do that, and you have people that see you. Yeah,
exactly, which is exactly mirrors healthy secure attachment for children, because securely attached children they feel safe going off and exploring. I mean, it's not only with other people, it's also like they tend to feel like, oh, I can explore the world, I can be creative, I can, because I know that mommy and daddy are there, or, I know that somebody's there when I come back. And so I love that you brought that in, because and it affects every area of your life. It's not just your relationships. It's also how you are in your creative life. It's also how you are in, like, I'm curious about this new hobby, I want to try it, like feeling. And so when we don't have that, we tend to have like more of the sort of shutdown around that, or a preoccupation with relationship, or a preoccupation with, sort of our internal world, because we're just overwhelmed a lot of the time. Yeah, I want to just ask, so I think this is a good place. And then, I want to ask, like, so when you were describing the clients that you work with, and this would be a good way of also saying like how people can find you and sort of the work that you do do these women come to you because of romantic, like because they've had challenges in romantic relationship? I just got curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny that you say that, because actually currently 2 new clients that I just took on, yes, that's kind of the crux of everything right now. And so I would say yes and no.
Uh-huh.
Oftentimes I would say it's like it's a mix. Like half of them I feel like are witnessing a breakdown in relationship to themselves, and the other half are witnessing the breakdown in relationship to others. But it's all about, like, they have some kind of awareness of something's not working in my relationships.
Okay.
And the way that I'm relating. So
Got it.
yeah, I do get quite a few.
Okay, I love that. Well, that's great. One of the things that Chelsea and I were going to talk about, and we didn't go so deep into, so maybe if we do a part 2 on this show or on her show, we'll do this, but was actually like how we tend to try to get these needs met in a romantic relationship, rather than like all these other relationships in our life, which obviously start, and our relationship to self. So one thing that I think is really beautiful about your work, and that I'm inspired by, is that it sounds like that not all the women that come to you actually are noticing a breakdown. And it's not like they're not over focused, but it's not like their focus is on romantic relationships. It's that through the things that you write about, I think people are probably tasting a sense of like, oh, there's something that I'm missing, there's a sense of relationship, deep relationship with self, and deep relationship with like other people in all realms and world, right? That I could be having that I'm not having. So something about that inspires me, because it says that, right, that in you sharing that there is this like elixir, like there's something that we're all really wanting that because of like the sort of Disney fairy tale, or the emphasis on romantic relationship, often people can kind of put it onto that, or some people put it onto work. It can be put onto anything, really, right? Like, oh, if I have this satisfying work relationship, there are people who feel that. But that really, I love, there's something that, it just touches me to think that like people are in, they can taste something of like, something isn't really working, and I really want to have this deeper relationship to self and other, and that they're drawn to you in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it is beautiful. It is beautiful.
Yeah. So why don't you actually tell us kind of how people can follow you, learn more about your work, and what you have going on in terms of courses or one-on-one work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've loved this conversation so much. So a few different ways that you can find me and work with me. One was what you mentioned. I have a podcast called The Self-Love Sisterhood. And truly it was like, I don't have a word for it. It was downloaded. Like I literally woke up at 4 a.m. one day and it was like, all right, you got to do this. You have to make this project, to just support women and seeing that they're not alone on their self-love journey. Because as you said, it's a very loaded word. And especially with things like Instagram, social media, there's a comparison that goes on with like, oh, am I not loving myself enough? Do I not think I'm worthy? And I wanted to really provide a space where there could be such a variety of women who share their stories of self-love that are so different. And so the podcast really just, is wonderful interviews with wonderful women who share their experience of self-love and how they practice it I also have an online course. It's a mini course, masterclass. It's 3 hours ish of content called Relation Shift. And so in it, I teach about the science of attachment theory, the energetics of boundaries, and core emotions. So it's really just the foundation of the work that I teach. And so it's a great way to kind of get a toe into what it would be like to work with me one-on-one. I have a group program called Unbound that I've been running for a little over a year now that is specifically for women. It's 8 weeks long. Really, it's all about breaking free of attachments and restraints. That's the definition of the word unbound. And that's done in many different ways. So if you're looking for a group dynamic and wanting to deepen your relationship to self, it's a great way to do it. I also am not taking a one-on-one clients right this moment, but I do have a wait list open, and I will be having space available starting in September. So if you're interested in working on with me one-on-one, that information, I'll give you a link or something.
Great.
And
Beautiful.
yeah, Instagram's the best way to find me.
Instagram's the way to follow her. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And we will probably continue this conversation because there's so much to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if for those of you who don't know me, who might be coming through Chelsea's channel, my name's Lori Beth. And on Instagram, I go by Psycho Spiritual Mentor. And I have 3, 6, and 9 month psycho spiritual mentorship program for women. And basically I'm helping women to move through developmental trauma. I'm providing a lot of somatic, spiritual, and therapeutic tools. So I take my 13-year career as a therapist and kind of all the things that we've been talking about basically today. And, and basically my big passion is for women to stop being a perpetual self-improvement project. So really be able to do the deep healing, but actually in the way that we've been talking about it today, which is it's just moment to moment and it's just being with self. But to resolve those traumas but also to just accept ourselves as we are now so that we can live like in the joyful expression of who we actually are. So it's like bringing more acceptance to all those parts of us. And I would say that my programs are really geared towards women that are, have been in the self-development industry for have done therapy, shadow work, all kinds of stuff, even some trauma therapy. You don't have to though, but basically I've been kind of steeped in this stuff, and they're really wanting like a very customized program that's gonna because I think that's basically going to break them free from that, because I think that when we're in the industry for a long time, we can kind of pick up this sense of like, oh, I have to keep working at this and working at this. And so it's really about making it more enjoyable, more fun, and, like really getting to the underbelly of what's in the way and shifting that. So you're welcome to reach out to me about that. And I also have I have other classes that I teach in different groups, and that will be ongoing. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And thank you for tuning in, everyone.